Welcome back, everybody, to another great Property Meet Property Developer Special. Now, today we're joined by a very special guest. Her name is Sarah Watt. So, Sarah, I know you because I've met you at Northampton PPN. I think you were reasonably recently starting out in this area. And I say that because you've got a bit of a story. So, can you just firstly tell the audience who is Sarah Watt? And what's the Sarah Watt story?
Hi, Andrew. Thanks for having me on. So the Sarah Watt story probably starts about a decade ago, actually. You can probably tell from the accent I'm not a local Brit. I am from Australia. And I'm an accountant by trade, but have always done property on the side, probably from when I was a graduate accountant. It's something I just kind of fell into because my boyfriend, now husband, Andrew, who's the other half of the company, um, first bought his place when he was 23. So I bought mine quite young as well. And we kind of literally just fell into that by doing refurbs on the side of our day job. And we did that for about maybe 8 years. And we would just buy the next one, save enough, buy the next one. And so we've been doing cosmetic flips and single lets since 2008 with our day jobs on the side. So this has always been our hobby. We moved to Melbourne, and that's where we did our flips there. And because we were only there for work, we didn't have a lot of family around us. Property became kind of like our saving grace on the weekends. That's what we would do. We absolutely fell in love with transforming something that was, decades old, 1960, and falling apart into a lovely family home, and either selling that on or putting tenants inside. So that's what we absolutely love to do. And then we came to the UK in 2016. And just started the portfolio from scratch. So we had a small pot of money and we literally just started again. So started with buying our own family home, and then starting to buy some single lets locally. We wanted to stay in an area that we were familiar with because we're based in Milton Keynes. And so that's how we kind of started. And when I met you in August 2019, I hadn't even heard of Northampton at the time, I have to admit, but we were kind of wanting to explore the HMO option. And Milton Keynes is quite a tough area to get started in because of Article 4. So we started exploring Northampton and going up there to see what it was about. And that's when I kind of met you through networking and things. And so since then, we've gone on to acquire 3 HMOs in Northampton. So they've been our latest 3 conversions within the last 15 months.
Wow. So let me just take back to one thing that you said there, just to help the audience. You've mentioned a thing called Article 4, and Milton Keynes is quite hard to create HMOs. What Sarah's referring to there is a restriction of the planning rights to convert a house, a C3 building, to a C4 HMO. And that makes it very difficult to get a planning permission to create HMOs in Milton Keynes. Now, I'm impressed because we were talking earlier and you like to do things in threes. You did 3 houses in 2 different areas of Australia. You then came to the UK and you've done 3 houses in Milton Keynes, wasn't it, from memory? And then you've come to Northampton and you've started doing HMOs. Now, your HMOs are fantastic. I mean, I thought I just walked into a 5-star hotel. It was that awesome. And tell me, how do you manage balancing work and property and creating such fabulous places for people to live?
That's a great question. Balance is tough. I'm not going to lie. We both still have our full-time day jobs, and our latest 2 refurbs from September through to the end of January, we were still working from home. So we would be reliant on our trade teams that we've built up a reputation with. Lots of WhatsApp videos, lots of phone calls. We would pop in after work on weekends. It was nonstop. It was nonstop for 5 months. And I wouldn't say that it's something I would recommend to do long term. I'd probably say autumn, winter tends to be our renovation season. So we work on a very cyclical basis, where for some reason our spring is our deal chasing season. Summer is when we go and relax and go on holiday most of the time pre-COVID. And then we get back into it. Autumn, winter becomes our refurb season, and all of our trade teams come back. So it's just because we've done 2 back-to-back that it's been quite exhausting. But I think trying to manage that balance and full-time work, we take annual leave in rotation to try and make it work. So certain days off. So it has been tough. But now I'm moving into more of a part-time role. And so that should hopefully free up more time to kind of focus on property a bit more. But it hasn't been impossible. I think we rely, especially with the first lockdown, we rely on, or the second lockdown, should I say, November-ish. We relied on a lot of childcare. So we do have a babysitter, and we would rotate, and we would do the morning shift. We'd put her in for childcare for 5 hours, and then I'd do the afternoon shift and he'd pick her up. So it's a massive balancing act, I have to say, with young children. But it's something that is completely doable if you communicate well, and if you have the right people around you. You can generally delegate majority of that stuff. You should only really be there to be the eyes and ears to make sure that nothing catastrophic is going to happen. And then after that, it's the trust and the communication within your team.
Yeah. Well, some great tips there about having the right team around you and delegating, and you're there just to make the executive decisions and oversee to make sure things are not going off track. I mean, are there any particular tips that you would share that you find particularly helpful? You've mentioned WhatsApp. I use that extensively as a means of communication. Is there anything that you do specifically, or are you pretty much?
That's a good one. I think because we've been doing this for over a decade, we've kind of been doing at least one project a year for the last. Yeah, I think we're up to project 13 is our next one. So we've kind of got this cosmetic refurb project management down pat, to the point where our last one we didn't even need, the normal charts and stuff I put together. We didn't even need that because our trade team knew exactly what to do. They've been doing this for so long with us now. I think it's like our 5th or 6th project in the UK with the same trade team. So I think the open communication, WhatsApp has been an absolute savior. Sending videos and photos back visually. Did you mean here, or did you mean this wall? But also a physical walkthrough. So when we bring our trade team on board, yep, we've just got the keys for this one. They'll either know exactly what to do, describe everything that you need in detail. They'll ask you questions of things that you may not have thought of. Other things are like, yeah, I've got to still think about what I'm going to do with this one. But generally speaking, the whole room needs a paint, so that they get some sort of idea what type of timelines they're working to. And so that we can assess the scope and the scale right at the beginning. And then I will obviously be there kind of from a directional point of view. So I'd pop in maybe 1 to 2 times a week during season, and then I'd just leave them to kind of get on along with the work. So long as there's a good scope of works and they understand all the little details that you want, nothing's really going to go astray unless you have a supply problem, which we did run into with this project, I'm not going to lie. I'm normally a pretty good planner. I will have my materials planned out 1 to 2 weeks in advance, and kind of time from availability of trades and supply. With this lockdown, it's been really, really tough. There's something that we had to wait for. We had to push the bathroom back right to the end because of tile supplies and paint supplies as well. So I think working around that has been challenging, but always keeping your trade team aware of what's going on. Supplies were, I think I was only about 4 days out from when they needed it. I really had to get a crack on to the next one. It's like, oh, we're going to run out of paint. Okay, I've got to go back to Johnston's trade and get more of that. So open communication has been really key. And we would just ping photos back and forth, call each other on video so we knew exactly where things were. That's our main communication tool with our trades. It's nothing fancy.
So it's quite time intensive, given that you've got a job as an accountant. I mean, that must be a big challenge to overcome. But what impressed me about your HMOs is they're phenomenal. They're like hotels. I mean, you've got bars, you've got pool tables, you've got a leisure zone, you've got kitchens and diners, you provide them with games, and they're communities, and they're fantastic. So what sort of puzzled me is everybody says, don't buy newer properties. Sarah's strategy is go against the flow and I'll buy newer properties. Why? Why do you do that? And you've done a couple of properties during the last I say the last lockdown, the last 12 months of 3 lockdowns. So how do you find those properties, and why do you do newer properties?
That's a really good question. I think when we went on a HMO course in 2019, when we did a lot of our HMO training, a lot of them would say, buy the older stuff, buy the Victorian terraces, play with everyone else in the city centre. And we had a look at some, to be honest, in Northampton and Milton Keynes. And the state of some of them that were being sold was very eye-opening. Let's just put it that way. And so we had friends who were doing rent to rent in Bedford, and they actually had a 3-story townhouse. And I went over there to have a look at it when they were just finishing off, and we are just helping them out on kind of like an open day. And that was quite an eye-opening experience. I said, well, this has gone against the grain for what we were told. Why on earth would you be on the outer suburbs of a town? And that's when they said, because we want our tenants to have cars, because they've actually got an asset backing them. So, okay, that's really unique and really interesting. So we kind of applied the same kind of principles to Northampton, knowing that Milton Keynes had a very strict policy against conversions. We had a look at some existing, it just wasn't right for us. So we started looking outside an Article 4 zone, which Northampton at the time was. So we started looking there. For us, it was all about floor plan. So if a property had the right floor plan with the right room sizes and it was ready to go, it kind of de-risked the project for someone who was new to HMOs. I didn't want to go back to brick. I didn't want extensive refurb in case it went wrong. There was so many things coming from a single landlord point of view. It was just too risky. So we went with a newer kind of property. But really it was all about floor plan, and there's not many that has the floor plan that will work. I mean a floor plan that is almost ready to go, no structural work, and you're just doing the cosmetic stuff, which is what we are kind of experts in. So that's kind of how we fell into it. We didn't want to play with everybody else because there's a lot of talk about oversaturation. And so we wanted to build a premium kind of product on the outer edges. And that's what we were finding as well, especially in Milton Keynes, same principle. The further out you go from the town centre, in some ways, the nicer the properties get. And we know that people still work out on those satellite estates or suburbs. So long as there's industry, shops, retail, all of that outside, you don't have to play in the city centre. And I think we trialled it with one. We're going to see if it worked because we weren't exactly sure of the demand, being new HMO landlords. That was a really good way to experiment it. And for our very first one, which is in the background you see behind me, it went, I think we filled all 5 rooms within 3 weeks. And so we knew the demand was there. It was easier to let out than a single let, actually. And so we knew we hit the nail on the head with this one when it was so easy to tenant. And so, yeah, it was just the right property for us, and we bought more in the area.
Brilliant. And because you bought 2 during a lockdown, does that mean the seller had a motivation to get out of the property, or because I mean, to me, I was flabbergasted. You got a great deal, and it's a fantastic property in an awesome location. I mean, you can throw a coin and hit the local shop. Not that I'd recommend doing that. You might break the window. But I mean, were there motivations behind the seller and why you purchased the property at all?
Yeah, It's really interesting because we always aim for a win-win. I think if someone loses out of this situation or being caught with their pants down, I just don't think it's a nice situation to be. With all three of our HMO purchases, we weren't the first and we weren't the highest offer. So I think that was quite key because what we offered as investors is we were no lower chain and we could offer speed and certainty. Certainty is what they needed. So in all three cases, they've been trying to sell their home for over a year. And they've had multiple chain breaks. So lower chain and upper chain. Most of these guys are, a smaller family home wanting to go into a bigger family home. So there was long chains involved. And they would have on either end, we were the third buyers to come through, then the upper chain would break, and they were just trying to sell that in the end, they just wanted the certainty that someone wasn't going to break this chain. So in all three cases, we would kind of say that we were like chain savers in some ways, because that's exactly what we are. We said, this is our offer. We don't muck around. I've been mucked around by sellers myself in previous deals, and it's not a nice feeling to have, even from a buyer's point of view. And so we offered the certainty. I said, we were going to offer this price, and it wasn't a low ball. This wasn't, 30% below market value or something like that. It was a fair offer, but we said what we can offer you is the speed and the certainty that you can complete when you are ready, because we've got no lower chain. And for us, this is what we planned to do with it. We were open and honest with sellers up front, and that's what built a really good relationship with all three.
Well, that's really brilliant that you've managed to identify what their pain was, which was broken chains, and then give them some certainty. And that obviously reflected in that you got a fair price for the property without having to push too hard to get a great deal. Now, you bought these during a COVID lockdown window. What sort of due diligence did you do? Because I imagine it changed a little bit from, hey, I'll just walk up there, kick the bricks, have a look, and it all works out. You probably had to undertake different due diligence or do the due diligence differently to what you'd normally do. Was there anything you learned from doing it in a lockdown?
One big key thing that I can take away with the lockdown is speed. So with the last two, I had been stalking them since October 2019. And at the time we were still doing this project, we were tied up with it. And so I could see them come up on Rightmove, and I thought, oh, they're so perfect. The floor plan is perfect. And we were just tied up with another project that, we couldn't do three at once, basically. So we were still trying and testing it. So I waited, and these actually sold. The two that we recently had actually sold to somebody else. And I thought, okay, let's just watch this to see whether or not it completes. And I would call the agents up every 1 to 2 months just to see, just checking how it's going with exchange. Doesn't exchange yet? If it ever falls through, I'd be really keen, and just touching base with the agents. Post-COVID lockdown, this is about May 2020, they both fell through at the same time. So I called the agent up as soon as I got the alert, and I said, I'm super interested. I've been super interested. You don't want to come across as a desperate buyer, but basically came across and said, look, I'm willing to view today. And within an hour of it being relisted, I was up there going for COVID, all gelled up and masked up and everything like that. And I would do the viewing, and within 30 minutes I would make the offer, because I already knew what floor plan I was after. What I was looking for was a condition of the property, to how much refurb work would I need to do this to factor in. But I already knew in my head, prior due diligence, I knew what I would be willing to pay. So it wasn't too far away from that. And what qualified our offer was the speed and certainty. So I think if it wasn't for that speed, getting up there within an hour of it being relisted, that's what got it over the line. Because basically I was able to knock out all the Saturday viewings. I went up there on a Tuesday, and I said, look, this is my offer, but if you're gonna accept that offer, all future viewings will have to be off off the books. And so that's how I got in. It was literally for speed, because I was competing with quite a few other people. I wasn't necessarily the highest offer. One of the vendors actually did confirm with me, you were the highest, but you were most qualified. I just didn't want to be mucked around again. So that's what he said to me, and that's why he went with our offer.
Well, that's a really great tip there, to actually keep an eye on properties that you've wanted that might fall out of bed. So until they exchange, the deal isn't done. And if it does fall over, take action straight away. Don't sit on your hands, because sitting on your hands would have lost Sarah the deal. But I think that the reason you obviously had your lower offer accepted was the certainty, because you'd identified the vendor, the seller, needed certainty there. Now, I'm puzzled. I mean, I'm puzzled here because the world and his wife are predicting doom and gloom and property prices are going to fall. And yet here's you going out and buying more properties. What? Why do you think these offer good investments? And I know we've been speaking and you do things in threes, but there might be four in the pipeline. So why are you still investing when the world's thinking it's doom and gloom?
I think for us, property's always been what we've done. And over the long term, we're long-term investors. We don't trade properties. We don't flip them in 6 months. And because we're holding them over the long term, we've seen what it can do. The same thing is with an Australian market. It's a capital growth market. It's not really income producing until 5 or 6 years down the track because of tax benefits. So we've seen what long term it can do. And if you know how to refinance and structure your portfolio properly, it's just the golden goose that keeps on giving. It's almost triple leverage in some ways, because you've got the income, you've got the capital growth, and you've got diversification within property as well. So I think for us, it was that's definitely key, is long-term holding.
Well, it makes jolly good sense to long-term invest. And in life, there will be lots of small speed bumps, and you've just got to learn to be able to ride those speed bumps. And your model, you're not, as we can see from your properties, you're not competing against the mainstream HMO marketplace. You're actually differentiating yourself. You're becoming an Apple phone, in that you're not low value Huawei phone, you're a high value Apple. And you're targeting high value demographics as well, because I was quite impressed with the jobs that some of your tenants had. I mean, do you want to just share what the jobs were? Because they certainly weren't blue collar warehouse workers, were they?
No, a lot of my tenants are young professionals. So their background is they're looking for an economical, furnished accommodation before buying their own home. So a lot of them are in that space where they just want to save money for their first deposit, which I think is fantastic, because I think that's exactly what a HMO should be. It should be allowing you to save money to get on the housing ladder. And two of mine have actually moved on to the next stage of their life, which I think is great. And as a landlord, there's nothing better to see than having your tenants move on from that. So a lot of my tenants are white collar professionals. They're NHS, they're law enforcement, they're office admin. And we cater for a wide variety. It's not just all en suites. I don't do all en suites. There's a wide variety within the rooms to cater for males and females. So for us, it's more of the premium end of the market. We find them a little bit more stable. And there's nothing wrong with blue collar. We do have a couple of those with occupations that are blue collar, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's just the rooms will target for a certain demographic because of the way we dress them, and the level of refurb that we put into it. So our latest one, not that you can see that behind me, but maybe you'll be able to show us a screenshot of that, did have a pool table, did have a bar, does have a wellness yoga corner, because that's the kind of stuff that our tenants really like. And especially with COVID and lockdown, they're working out at home. They want to have housemates who are coherent with each other and all get along. And it's worked out really well for us, providing some sort of entertainment at home when they can't go out to the pub and can't meet their friends, and mixed households. So I think that was quite important to have. You know, why would I want to go outside when I have all of this at home?
Yeah.
I think, creating that really homely experience, because a HMO is more than just four magnolia walls to me. And that's what we wanted to create for our tenants.
Well, what I found really interesting from that, and something which I think the audience can learn from, is what you've done is targeted people where this is effectively their last step before they buy their own home, and they're saving up for a deposit. Because I imagine, and I haven't asked you this question, but I'll ask it you now because it's come out of this interview, is you probably don't have any arrears because they're saving up for deposits. So they've got all the money to pay the rent.
Yeah.
Because their next move is their own home.
That's exactly it. So we have been super, super lucky that we have had no arrears throughout all of 2020. We have had some turnover because they've obviously moved on to go buy their own flat or move out with their partner or whatever it is. It's the next stage of life. So arrears wise, we've been so lucky in that regard. Most of them, not all of them, but most of them would have cars. And so that for us is quite key, that they don't want any CTJs against their name because they wouldn't be able to get a mortgage. So for us, they're the perfect kind of tenants for that room. It's a win-win for the tenant and for us. And I think it's great not to have those sorts of issues if you can avoid it, because we are sitting at the premium end of the HMO market.
Well, what I would do is urge everybody to drop a comment below on how well Sarah's done on that, because in my view, you've said you were lucky you didn't have arrears. I actually contradict you there and say it's not luck, it was planning. It was a business plan and executed well, that you screened your tenants before they came in, and you screened them to make sure they met your values and the requirements of the others within the house to actually create a harmonious environment. So it's actually by design, not by luck, Sarah. Well done.
Thanks.
Just so that we can share any final thoughts with the audience. I mean, what have you learned since coming to Northampton and doing HMOs, or what would you do different if you were starting again? Is there anything you'd do different, or anything you've learned as a result that you'd like to share?
I think it's been a massive learning curve, and I think now that Article 4 has come into Northampton, you're not every man and his dog is just converting any old house. But I think the biggest learning for us is probably being the tenant management side. It was something that was a really big hurdle for us to get over, coming from being a single let landlord who would just hand over the keys to an agent and have no tenant involvement whatsoever, to actually being semi hands-on. I wouldn't say hands-on. We only really look at the viewings and the maintenance, and all of our admin is still outsourced to an agent. I think being more involved or closer to your tenants, actually knowing their names, whereas before I didn't even know their names, like a very typical investor. I think that's probably been the biggest learning curve for us going into HMOs, is that it will be more hands-on. It will require a little bit more time, but I think with the cash flow and the returns that you get from a HMO far outweighs the minor inconvenience of having a trade team to come out a little bit more often than a single let. And that's not to say that single lets are, generally speaking, they're set and forget, because it turns into someone's home and they take care of all the utilities. But I think having that sort of side it's actually probably not as scary as you think. That was probably the biggest hurdle, was probably a mental hurdle for us. Actually saying, there's going to be voids galore and turnover galore, and these are going to trash your houses. And it's just a lot of myths and preconceptions from other people. And it's generally not the case. And I think, getting over that mental hurdle, of it's really not as, tenants are not as scary. They're almost a little bit more scared of you than you are of them. That was a big one for us going into HMOs. It's actually not as bad as you probably think it is.
Yeah, well, I had the very big honor and privilege of seeing you checking in one of your new arrivals, and she was a lovely young lady, and everybody was happy and bubbly, and you were brilliant with her, and the atmosphere in the house was fantastic. We're not showing video of the people in the house for obvious reasons, so the videos you've been seeing have been the stock video, but it's a really phenomenal setup you've got. It's a brilliant business model, and I believe you are the future of where HMOs will be moving to through legislation, regulation, and also demand, because your bedrooms are not small. I mean, they were what, 20 square meters plus ish?
Yeah,
All
most
of
of
the
them,
rooms.
yeah, they're huge.
Yeah, I mean, I felt like we could play five-a-side football in there. They were that big. But they were well presented, well furnished. They had facilities to work from home, and it felt like hotel rooms. I really did feel like I was in a hotel, and I think at the end of our visit, I said to you, "Can I move in?" So
That's what we want to hear.
it was that nice. It was that nice, and I love the little tweaks, the names on the doors, and all the little touches. It's got detail that a lot of places don't have. A lot can be soulless, but this had personality, and it was lovely. So I congratulate you on the very outstandingly awesome work that you have done to achieve what you've achieved. And I hope everybody will drop Sarah some comments below and give her a big thumbs up to say she's done awesome. Sarah, it's been a delight having been able to share with you your properties and also to share your experience and journey with everybody. We'll drop some social media contacts below so that people can stay in touch with you. And if you want to help Sarah with a project, or you know a landlord who's got a newish type property, Sarah's looking for them in the right areas in Northampton. So stay in touch. Sarah, thank you. Any parting words you'd like to share?
Thank you so much for having us on. And I think if anyone wants to follow us on our journey, we're quite big on Instagram at ALTST Property. So come and join us and come and interact with us, and we'd love to meet you and chat with you. So yeah, come and interact with us.
And you can obviously meet Sarah in person at a networking event when lockdown ends, and this video is recorded in another lockdown. So. But Sarah, thank you so much for sharing with everybody some really inspirational tips there, and some great properties to inspire people that actually, if they're just in one of these Victorian townhouses, they've got some real competition on their hands from you. And it's not to be sniffed at, because I want to move in. So thank you very much. I'm Andrew Roberts, and thank you very much to Sarah Watt for joining me today.
Thank you.